Today we're going over the single most overrated Pokemon in each generation competitively speaking, including Ubers. We'll be taking the highest ranked Pokemon introduced in each gen that can truly be said to be overrated by general public perception. And remember, a Pokemon can be good or even great and still be overrated. And the choices in this video range from that to Pokemon that aren't actually that great to begin with. But we're starting off huge with none other than Mewtwo for Gen 1. Yes, we actually said that. It may be the original Uber, it may be the entire reason there is an Uber tier to begin with, and it is the fullest encapsulation of everything wild about Gen 1, but new wisdom has come to light as high-level RBY players, previously a rather niche metagame, has gotten played more in recent years. Now, this is not to say that Mewtwo isn't the best Pokemon in all of Gen 1, and that it isn't required on every serious team and all that jazz, because all that jazz is certainly true, but it's more that the long-lived, widely believed conception of Mewtwo being the sun that the metagame revolves around has come to be, let's say, an exaggeration, as in even more than that statement's overdone nature would suggest. Put simply, RBY Ubers is not just unstoppable Mewtwo simulator. This is assisted by the fact that Mewtwo often counters itself, meaning you always have your own as a very solid worst case scenario, which is not something that can really be equaled by, say, Mega Rayquaza. But playing around Mewtwo, even when not using your own, isn't about living and dying by the Ice Beam Freeze War. But what about when you can't freeze Mewtwo because it willingly takes paralysis? Well, contrary to previous belief, Mewtwo can't just freely take paralysis because it makes it easier to take on with powerful physical attackers like Tauros, Snorlax, and Rhydon, or explosions from Exeggutor and Cloyster. These are precisely the kind of Pokemon that Mewtwo would obliterate if it hit them first, but when it's slower, a lot of possibilities open up. This would also apply to something like Mew, with Explosion or Swords Dance boosted Earthquake, or even Self-Destruct from opposing Mewtwo. Indeed, trading your Mewtwo from the opponents and playing a 5v5 without them was actually a pretty reliable strategy. Now, it's definitely not as simple as simply hitting Mewtwo with physical attacks though. It's not the ultra frail Alakazam. It's got good defense and gargantuan HP, so it's far from a pushover physically, as most fully illustrated by its ability to survive the game's strongest move, which is Snorlax's Self-Destruct. But just because it doesn't instantly fall over, that doesn't make it any less vulnerable. Especially since it's being so eager to avoid paralysis in the first place, which means it's easier to chase out of battle. It's not like Mewtwo can just reliably one-hit KO everything that might threaten paralysis against it either, strong as it is. Now, you might lose a Pokemon to bring a paralyzed Mewtwo to low health, but it's a worthwhile trade, especially if you preserve your own Mewtwo in the process. Plus, the alternative for trying to break through it is trying to tackle its impenetrable special side. Paralysis alongside physical attackers is a staple combination of Gen 1 Ubers, and generally gets the job done. Of course, sometimes Mewtwo will still win, because it's Mewtwo, but that's true of any top tier Pokemon, whether it's in the same generations like Tauros and OU, or let's say Dragon Dance Tyranitar in Gen 3, no matter how well prepared for it you might be. Beyond threatening Mewtwo offensively, you have to be able to withstand its hits as well, but the methods you use for this are the same Pokemon you generally be using in OU. This is not to say you don't see movesets like Light Screen Chansey specifically take it on, but you're not at all forced into using junk Pokemon just to slow Mewtwo down, nor does it automatically destroy all but itself and almost nothing else. With its high crit rate involved, Mewtwo can theoretically get fairly close to KOing everything that isn't Mew, Chansey, or itself, but it generally struggles to do this in practice, at least reliably, and it also can't have all the moves it wants. Number one, Amnesia and Recovery are usually givens, but then it wants all of Psychic, Thunderbolt, and Ice Beam, and as soon as it drops any of them, it will be less able to threaten major Pokemon like the physical attacking normal types, the Slowbro whose Amnesia can go toe-to-toe with it, and the Stun Spore and Explosion threatening Exeggutor respectively. This is already bad enough without considering its many other options. Submission for Chansey, Barrier for physical defense boosting, Thunder Wave and Self-Destruct for other Mewtwo. It's gotten to the point where Amnesia and or Recover aren't always givens anymore. Though they're of course the eternal standard, they became so regularly played around that they could certainly no longer be considered the unstoppable sweeper of Mewtwo's reputation. Now that would be vastly overrated in this sense. As such, Mewtwo evolved to become more of a dedicated wall breaker with T-Wave and Boom to take out other Mewtwo, and safely pave the way for more consistent cleanup teammates like Mew and Tauros. And to further illustrate the point that the metagame isn't just Mewtwo and things that try not to lose to Mewtwo, the idea of there being plenty of good Pokemon that are generally good in standard Gen 1 for the same reasons extends very much so to Pokemon that are utterly dominated by Mewtwo. If that were true, you wouldn't see Gengar, for example, because it's crushed by Mewtwo, but it's still viable in Ubers because it has great matchups against other Pokemon which make it solid, just like in OU. And that's despite Gengar being utter Mewtwo bait once Sleep Clause is activated. Basically, Mewtwo is on this list to spread the word on what Gen 1 Ubers players have understood for a while now. and that is that it should be brought down to earth a little bit, as it is currently overrated. And next, from Ultimate Threat to Ultimate Wall, we have Blissey in Gen 2. But before we go into the next mod, here's a word from our sponsor, Blizzard Entertainment. And yes, that means we're talking about Hearthstone, the iconic free-to-play digital card game from Blizzard. If you used to play Hearthstone back in the day, or just haven't played Hearthstone in a while, this is the best time to come back to Hearthstone. Why is that? Well, Hearthstone is back with a major new expansion, Cataclysm. They are running an event called the Dragon's Horde of Rewards, which gives players huge free access to prior expansion cards. So that's 32 plus 33 sets, and that includes golden copies. I can't believe they are giving this much away for free. In fact, yours truly, who has always wanted to try Hearthstone but felt like it would take too long to get a good deck, has decided to jump in himself, and just from basic rewards from the Apprentice track and a few Cataclysm packs, I already have a full aggro druid deck, which is one of the best decks in the format right now. This is my benchmark for getting into any card game, and Hearthstone has fulfilled it. But you need to act now because this is for a limited time only during the Cataclysm expansion. So if you want a competitive deck, you can click the link in my description below or scan the QR code to download and play Hearthstone for free on PC or mobile. Jump in today, and thank you so much to Blizzard Entertainment for sponsoring this video. Blissey is part of the most famous stall duo ever, Scar and Bliss, which for generations walled seemingly everything so effectively as to feel unfair. In early Diamond and Pearl, some players even demanded they not be used together for being cheap. Despite not resisting them, Blissey shrugged off insanely powerful special attacks, things like Choice Specs Heatran Overheat, that had a tendency to blast or even resist. The second generation, GSC, was known as the stall generation, and while this was sometimes exaggerated, with offense being very good and sometimes even overwhelming, there was no denying the brutal lengths that games would sometimes go to. And since the stall generation also introduced both Skarmory and Blissey, with Skarm being key as the best overall Snorlax counter, it seems like the perfect origin point for Scar and Bliss. Everything about the gen seemed perfectly tweaked for their walling prowess. The slow pace, the low base power of many attacks, few and largely underwhelming boosting moves, the maxed out EV system that made even frail Pokemon like Gengar capable of taking a few hits, let alone such bulky Pokemon. However, whatever one's view on the veracity of Gen 2 as the stall gen, it's not because of Blissey, because Blissey isn't that actually relevant a Pokemon in the overall metagame. The problem is that it just doesn't do enough. Now, this seems ridiculous to say in a generation where Miltank and Umbreon regularly stall Curse Sweepers out of PP with Growl and Charm, but it's not so much that Blissey's passiveness is so bad in and of itself, as much as there's another superb special wall, Raikou, which also doubles as one of the tier's top offensive Pokemon, alongside the ubiquitous Snorlax providing every team with a built-in special hit taking while also being the premier threat. Walling is important, and while you do often see things like Skarmory repeatedly do nothing but stave off Lax, being able to threaten your own offense where you can is also incredibly important if you want to actually win and not just tie after 1,000 turns. Even by wall standards, Blissey doesn't pressure opponents enough, which makes it easy for opponents to play around it. Blissey isn't all bad though, not by a long shot. It actually does fit quite well on several bulky teams for the immense team support of its Heal Bell and Light Screen, which enables major threats like Belly Drum Snorlax and Swords Dance Marowak to boost up, rest off damage, and then come back later, but it is far more specific a choice even for stall teams than Raikou is, because Raikou actually pressures the opponent. Blissey's elite status first came about in Advance, where it had more passive damage to work with, as well as natural cure for status, but even in the most stall-oriented generation of all, being the ultimate staller didn't mean much when that's almost all you offered. Now we go back to Ubers, sort of. As for Gen 3, we have Shedinja. Shedinja is of course not Uber itself, but it does have a niche in the tier, to the delight of many. It is the epitome of a bad Pokemon whose few yet specific and valuable good points wind up allowing it to transcend tiers and take on some of the best Pokemon in the game. With Wonder Guard, it doesn't matter that Shedinja has literally 1 HP when it takes literally 0 damage from anything that doesn't hit it super effectively, and the Pokemon that it blanks just happen to include the most powerful, dominant threats in Gen 3 Ubers like the Lati Twins, Kyogre, and even some variants of Mewtwo and Deoxys Attack, as all of them love spamming Thunder and Ice Beam alongside some other moves, but by and large, they can't touch Shedinja. And these Pokemon are paired together too, meaning Shedinja is just blanking the vast majority of teams' offenses. What really drives this niche home is that, this being Ubers, Shedinja doesn't have to fear those passive damage tools that feint it automatically in OU. Tyranitar and its Sand and its Pursuit, for that matter, are very rare in the world of Groudon and Kyogre's dueling Sun and Rain, given that both Laddies are immune to them, and how the Spikers can also struggle to switch in against the Uber threats. It's all perfectly set up for Shedinja, right? Well, yes, it does have a place in the tier, but sadly Gen 3 Ubers is nowhere near the Shedinja paradise that those amazed by the fact that the Husk bug is viable there at all think it is. In fact, it's not even close. Shedinja's not even overrated by virtue of being decent to pretty good relative to the excitement over its presence. It's just straight up not very good at all. Yes, it technically does what you think it does, but it's also incredibly easy to work around it. First, spikes are actually far more common than you'd expect. Skarmory, Fortress, and even rain-supported Swift Swim Amistar throw them down with regularity, so you can't just bank on them not showing up. And this is also often the case even when fitting Rapid Spin on your team, as not only is it not an easy task given the flaws of the spinners, but also not guaranteed to work, with battlers against spikers tending to be uphill even without the possibility of Gengar showing up to spin block. Second, Pursuit is actually quite common, not on the rare Tyranitar, but on the extremely common, very top tier Metagross, which uses the move despite the lack of stab to remove the scariest Pokemon in the tier, Deoxys Attack. In fact, trapping Deoxys Attack is such a big deal, Skarmory has been known to run it, even with a base 40 special attack and all. Third, Shedinja isn't even guaranteed to wall what it's supposed to on some Sun teams. Latios runs Hidden Power Fire, not even for Shedinja, but just for Steel types in general. Let's put it this way, rather than Shedinja, you're quite a bit likelier to use and succeed with Slack King. Now, it's certainly not bad at all, but despite how many fans Shedinja has, it's a far cry from good. But now for an actual Uber under ideal conditions, we have Manaphy in Gen 4. Manaphy was considered far too broken for OU, where it had to activate its hydration ability by using Rain Dance itself, so Ubers is where it got to operate under the permanent range set by King Kyogre, and that seemed to be a cinch. Its stats, while lower than the usual Uber fare, were the same as Jirachi's, which was a key Uber Pokemon, and Manaphy's threat level was incredible. Tail Glow only provided a +2 special attack boost pre-Gen 5, yeah, only +2, as if that and Rain doesn't mean its Surf isn't dusting most everything in its path, especially since Rain Hydration Rest is the perfect recovery move, back up to full health every time, no sleep turns required, and of course hydration prevents you from being slowed down by status to begin with. Plus, Manaphy's base 100 speed is actually quite fast by Uber standards, outrunning the slew of defining base 90s like Groudon, Kyogre, Dialga, Giratina Origin, and even the base 95 Rayquaza, which is especially nice considering Ray's airlock ability temporarily shutting down Manaphy's rain boost. Not that all these traits aren't great to have, but while one can't exactly argue with the value of such traits, their effectiveness has certainly been overrated relative to Manaphy's flaws, and the cost of including it on a team, oh, it's hardly a drag, with its eternally useful mono water typing and great natural bulk, but it does often wind up filling a pseudo-redundant second Kyogre kind of niche, except one that's far less threatening. You generally have an easier time fitting the Swift Swimmers Kingdra or Kabutops on a Kyogre team, because though they're far frailer, they're also stronger and much faster under rain, so it's easier to get value out of them. Manaphy is too easily thwarted by counterattacks, to say nothing of the problem of fitting everything it wants into its moveset, as Tail Glow and Surf are givens, and it also wants Rest, but it also wants both Ice Beam and Grass Knot. Plus its non-water, and thus non-rain boosted moves don't do that much even after a boost given its special attack against such bulky targets. Even when everything goes right for Manaphy, it's not nearly as guaranteed to make things happen, an issue exacerbated when it has to tangle with Groudon replacing its Rain with Sun. It's fairly good, but not really more. Kind of like the next Pokemon, Zekrom, except this one's a box art legendary, which makes its overrated status more disappointing, yet more understandable. Now, if we're being fair, it's not Reshiram, because after the first few weeks of Gen 5, Reshiram wasn't rated at all, and rightly so. Its counterpart Zekrom was much better off, lacking a Stealth Rock weakness and a secondary stab capable of obliterating a full health bulky Kyogre, an achievement almost no attack even the Ubers tier can muster up, while also safely threatening the massively dangerous Ho-Oh, in addition to the raw blistering power of its uniquely powerful dual stab, letting its Choice Bender blast through much of the metagame by force. Zekrom also had solid diversity to its game, most notably in mixed life form variants with Draco Meteor for Groudon and Focus Blast for Ferrothorn, or Choice Scarf and its speedy Volt switches. And yet, mighty though Zekrom and its flagship Bolt Strike were, its in-game efficacy was less than the reputation conjured by its impressive dual stab and attack would suggest. The problem was that, as strong as it was, Zekrom was largely interchangeable with the many other powerhouses populating Gen 5 Ubers. It's not that it didn't have unique, worthwhile traits, but rather that these traits didn't actually work well enough relative to its problems. It could threaten everything, which was why it seems so impressive, but it really had a matchup where it just went berserk and delivered on that crushing promise. Its base 90 speed stat blended in with the other Ubers, which alongside its general lack of defensive profile, making it hard for it to reliably switch in and fire its attacks off in such a fast-paced metagame. Even when it did get to attack, it could struggle with making the attacks land with as much impact as it required, given its limited opportunities and how well most ubiquitous bulky Arceus forms took it on. It's not that Zekrom was bad, not at all, but it was tough to justify with so much similarly talented competition. Now we go from the Dragon to the type that replaced it with Mega Diancie in Gen 6. Once upon a time, this would have been Talonflame, which was the defining Gen 6 Pokemon whose reputation for spamming Gale Wings Brave Birds suggested something nigh broken, or at least incredibly consistent to the affair, which was nowhere near reality. However, over time, Talonflame's perception caught up with its performances, and the lower general opinion of it meant it couldn't really be considered overrated anymore. So instead, we have the only Gen 6 Pokemon that got its Mega in Gen 6, Diancie. Now, it's certainly a great Pokemon, with its great speed and offenses alongside powerful Dual Stab, while its Magic Bounce ability both made it more difficult to take on for how it denied status as counterplay and offered incredible team support, and how it could deny opposing entry hazards, potentially even better, bouncing the hazards off back at the opponent. However, this is largely where the overrated part lies. Magic Bounce is a rather undeniable ability. It would have to be to get Mega Sableye banned, but as incredible as Magic Bounce's anti-Stealth Rock talents can be in support of something like Volcarona, Mega Diancie's capability for using it is slighter than it's often thought of as, given its many weaknesses and its terrible HP severely undercutting its good offenses, so much so that it risks getting KO'd when trying to pivot in against the majority of hazard setters, and largely outsources the hazard control to a teammate that can remove the hazards, a famously unreliable task which tends to go against the point of having Magic Bounce in the first place. It's not pleasant having to second guess whether or not to Stealth Rock with Ferrothorn when there's a Mega Diancie on the other team, but then again, it's only risking Stealth Rock against itself. Mega Diancie, on the other hand, risks getting crushed by Power Whip or Gyro Ball if it gets the prediction wrong. This issue is exacerbated because even if Mega Diancie does switch in safely, it's not quite so powerful as to threaten the one-hit kills necessary to force the hazard user out. To keep with the Ferrothorn example, even the quad effective Hidden Power Fire comes up short, and that's not even getting into Mega Diancie's issues fitting everything it wants into its moveset. There's Hidden Power Fire versus Ice, which is itself enormous, but then there's also the desire to run Earthquake in the same slot as well. Not only does Mega Diancie run its dual stabs, it's nigh required to run Protect in order to safely Mega Evolve in the first place. This, along with the lack of KO power, goes beyond just blocking hazards, as it also holds Mega Diancie back in terms of attacking well. For all its talents, Mega Diancie is overrated, more restrictive, and less effective than its extraordinary ability suggests. And speaking of abilities next, we have Ultra Necrozma for Gen 7. Ultra Necrozma is extraordinary, towering over the competition almost like Gen 1 Mewtwo. Its offensive profile alone is already absurd. Base 167 offenses alongside a base 129 speed, alongside the Neural Force ability, powering up its super effective hits even further. But what really makes it such extreme power and speed nightmares is that you don't even know if you're facing it until it attacks you. It starts out as Necrozma Duskmane or Dawn Wings, but in Gen 7 Ubers, nobody's using Dawn Wings and everyone's using Duskmane, which is one of the very best Pokemon in the tier, and very threatening in its own right, and in a very different way from Ultra Necrozma. Duskmane is a slow, bulky Steel Psychic. Ultra Necrozma is a fast, less bulky, though not frail Dragon Psychic. It's basically like if Metagross could suddenly transform into Latios. Countering these two is very, very different, and it's already difficult enough when you know what you're facing. When you don't know until after it's already attacking you, well, it's no surprise that Ultra Necrozma was briefly discussed for a ban from Ubers, like Mega Rayquaza. An ultimate Pokemon that disguises itself until the last second is understandably too much. But though Ultra Necrozma is like Gen 1 Mewtwo or Mega Rayquaza, it's also unlike those two in that it actually has opportunity cost. There is no cost to using Mewtwo in Gen 1, or Mega Rayquaza in Gen 6 or 7. Nothing you could possibly gain by using something else. Ultra Necrozma does have an opportunity cost because it means you are no longer using Duskmane, and that means you are giving up one of the best defensive Pokemon in the tier against major threats like Xerneas, while also being one of the premier offensive threats itself. It's kind of the inverse of the Gen 2 Blissey Raikou situation. Ultra Necrozma may be a tremendous threat, but Duskmane is a tremendous threat and a tremendous check to everything, with its amazing bulk and steel typing supported by its Prism Armor ability, weakening super effective attacks against it. Ultra Necrozma was dangerous, but more manageable to play around than the comparisons it drew. Far from a free win button, and a Pokemon for all its extreme danger precluded the use of another, more well-rounded one. Ultra Necrozma's VGC presence was also reminiscent of its singles career. Although it was present in several top-placing teams throughout 2019, it almost always paled in comparison to the utility both Necrozma DM and Dawn Wings brought to the table, which were extremely proficient Trick Room users, while Duskmane maintained its superb defensive profile that checked Xerneas. To make matters worse, Ultra Necrozma's natural predator, Yveltal, was almost omnipresent at the time. The potential unpredictability of Ultra Necrozma was also quite telegraphed, as Tapu Lele's presence on a Necrozma team was almost ubiquitous to Necrozma's Saiyan transformation. Ultra Necrozma's VGC potential and comparisons to Mega Rayquaza failed to deliver as its opportunity cost was just too great, and playing around and predicting it was just too simple. Now, speaking of extreme threats, though this time it isn't an Uber, we have Barraskewda. Though Barraskewda is very extreme, it's the epitome of a glass cannon. No defenses to speak of, but it's got a whale of an attack stat and nigh outmatched speed even before rain goes up and Swift Swim kicks in. In OU, only Dragapult and Zeraora are faster, and even that goes out the window when Barraskewda comes in a couple turns after Pelipper. Barraskewda was quite well regarded as a staple of Rain, the biggest reason to use the style. But though it sold that image quite well, looking a little further would reveal Rain users tended to get a bit less than they paid for. Barraskewda's problem was that the Rain-fueled Carnage, while certainly seeming appealing, outspeeding Dragapult with a Choice Bander packing an extra boost on top of that is a delightful prospect, but it naturally tends to thud into the metagame's primary tools for water moves. This is not really what you want in a Rain Sweeper. You want them to blast through the tier's primary water resist, whether with power or secondary stab, like the way Kingdra or Mega Swampert might have in previous generations. Barraskewda did not breeze by the likes of Slowbro, Toxapex, and Dragonite, among others. Basically, whatever preparations you made for Urshifu Rapid Strike would naturally mean you were pretty well off against Barraskewda as well. Barraskewda's primary problem was that its attack stat wasn't all that impressive when not using water moves. It may run Crunch, but it doesn't exactly do the type of damage that Slowbro can't regenerate off with ease. It also had a tough time fitting all the moves it wanted. After Crunch and Close Combat, it had to think about Psychic Fangs for Toxapex, Ice Fang for Dragonite, Flip Turn for powerful stab momentum, and all these moves came with another problem: prediction. Sure, Close Combat scared the lights out of Ferrothorn, but spamming Close Combat when there's also a Tapu Fini on the other side, or Dragonite, or both, that was a bad situation to be in, and a common one too. This is exacerbated by the fact that Barraskewda is indeed absurdly frail, making switching in exceedingly difficult, so even if you did say Psychic Fangs and Toxapex on the Switch, now you have a Barraskewda locked into Psychic Fangs, also known as the easiest thing to switch into imaginable, and you'll have to go through the fragile dance of getting Barraskewda on the field safely again later, while you still haven't necessarily dealt with the extent of the opposing water resist. Of course, Barraskewda is threatening, especially if it faces a more offensive team, but not to the extent that the hype would have you believe. Now to finish things off with another weather-abusing water type, we have Walking Wake in Gen 9. In a generation full of threats so powerful and hyper-optimized as to be over the top, Walking Wake is regularly seen as ranking among the very best of these, and while it's certainly dangerous, this can be at least a little generous. Its good qualities are great, and it is largely as ferocious as advertised, but not quite. Its impressive 125 base special attack and 109 speed are so excellent by Gen 9 standards, and with these it brandishes excellent choice specs boosted Water Dragon dual stab in the proud tradition of Kingdra and Palkia, which is also actually at its best in Sun. Sure, Palkia was also great under Sun, as like Walking Wake, it also had fire coverage, but Walking Wake did something even Palkia didn't. It could use its Water Stab under Sun, with Hydro Steam actually being boosted by it. Additionally, by running a timid nature and running a mere 8 less special attack EVs than Max, Walking Wake's Protosynthesis ability would boost speed, effectively functioning as a sort of chlorophyll, as it would be a Specs user both stronger and faster under Sun. Yes, Walking Wake can be a waking nightmare under the right circumstances, but while those circumstances are what its fiercest advocates have in mind, and with them it is indeed impressive, these circumstances are a bit too idealistic for the praise it receives to reflect on how well it functions in practice. First, its reliance on Sun is a limiting factor. However scary it is not entirely reliant on Sun, but without it, you would clearly see what could sometimes even be a factor under Sun, which is the fact that Walking Wake seems a lot stronger than it is. The dual stabs, one of which is Draco Meteor, while the other is Sun boosted, well, insane as it may seem, 125 base special attack just isn't what it used to be, and nor is 130 base power Draco Meteor. Hydro Steam is similarly effective, as even under Sun, it goes from 80 to 120 base power. This wouldn't be as much of a problem if Walking Wake weren't so deceptively frail, making the already tenacious prospect of getting on the field and limited Sun teams fairly challenging. Then again, Walking Wake could solve the power issue by EVing itself to gain a special attack boost from Protosynthesis instead, at the cost of boosting its speed, making it much easier to revenge kill, which was even more undesirable. This is not to diminish how powerful Walking Wake is, as its suspect test was well deserved, even if it didn't result in a ban. It's just that it's generally quite easy for many to see all the positives that it has going for it, and have their mental image of it inflated by the possibility of what it could be. Remember, a Pokemon can be great and overrated at the same time. And thank you so much to our Platinum patrons. Thank you to Amphozenus, Alex Sable, Anthony Belval Renault, Daniel Isbeast, Corman, Don Creek, Eric Dissing, Espion Lover, Funky, Glitcherton, Howl, Jack G, King Yabber, Nightfall, Megamon VGC, Mojo Game Slayer, Nurse Jake, One Penguin to Rule, Pretzel SP, Schmooter, Seagulls Incorporated, Soljiro Sakura, Spavoon, Skylaria, Soros and Croxon, Shiwei Miji, Stoneface Colin, Tyler, Kiboflu, Wardeen, Zathor for their major support of our videos. And don't forget to click the link in the description below or scan my QR code to download and play Hearthstone for free on PC or mobile.